Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Max Koutny. You've founded multiple companies. You're a serial founder. You've created a few, and now you're out there looking for acquisitions and stuff. So we're going to have an interesting conversation today about that process. Your history and kind of what you're looking for. So I'm looking forward to this. Usually I have advisors and lawyers and other stuff on there, but lately I've been trying to get some people that are right in the mix of things, and it'll be fun. We'll brainstorm some stuff too, like what's working for you, what's not working for you. So thank you for being here today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ron.
Cool. So let's start off with that. The ongoing joke is always the origin story, right? Like you were born and now you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisitions. How the hell do you end up on my show? Like fill in the gap for us. Tell us how you got it to be an entrepreneur and kind of fill in the journey a little bit of, from your beginning entrepreneur adventures till now.
I guess I was born an entrepreneur. I started, I went to college. My dad always used to joke with me and say, yeah, I used to watch all these shows about the success stories of different entrepreneurs. And so right out of college, I studied architecture and I actually left and went to London. And in London, I, s- I was going to conquer the world. Not sure how yet, but I was going to find out something. And so in London, I started working for Domino's Pizza at night, and I rented a small little office at the time, shared office space. And this was just sort of in the age of PCs. And so
Hmm.
wow, shows my age. But so I even remember going and buying an old typewriter. Must have been 30 years old and weighed a ton, grabbed that typewriter, pulled it across on the tube on London and started typing letters and looking for opportunities. And I found some ex friends of mine, or colleagues, they weren't even friends. They were associates that I sort of met in passing when I was leaving. And they had a granite quarry in South Africa. And I started selling their granite to Italian producers in Carrara. So I'd go over to Carrara and I did very well, got a lot of orders, got some orders out of Scotland as well. Then it came to light after supplying of some of the products that there was a imperfection in the granite. Anyway, long story short, ended up taking some geologists back to analyze the quarry and see if we could find a solution to this problem. And they couldn't. So that collapsed. And I started my next business when I was 26 at then. And that business was basically especially spackling product. Actually, it was a DIY product used for repairing buildings and patching holes. When I started that business, I lived in my office. I had a small office that I was renting with a small little warehouse space. And I lived there for about a year. My staff would I wake up in the morning, my staff would arrive and we would work. And I did that. And I bootstrapped that business from one employee to about 100 full-time employees. Some of the stories, I later hired an astute gentleman who was a chemist. And he would look at the formulas that I had created, because I created all these formulas myself. And he would shake his head and he didn't understand how I'd achieved all this without a chemical engineer. And it really was trial and error. And I think if I can say anything about entrepreneurship, it's trial and error, right? You try something, it works, you continue to do it, doesn't work, you fail, you try again. And you just carry on doing that cycle until you get some sort of traction and results. And then later on, while I had that business, I started another business in health and wellness. We were one of the first certified USD organic products in the US supplements, and one of the first the USDA certified skincare products on the market. And took a few years, a couple of years to develop that, worked very closely with the certifying agencies, and then grew that and was busy growing it. This was in the internet age. I actually was writing a ton of content, was doing all white hat SEO techniques, search engine optimization techniques to make sure we were featuring right at the top of the search engines and doing very well and had exceptional growth. And actually was number one, two, three, four. The first 10 top results, we were on the first page of keywords like natural vitamin, organic skincare, or natural, organic, natural skincare. And then I think Google didn't like what we were doing, although it was all white hat techniques, and they essentially blacklisted us. And so we had to find alternatives. So once again, had a failure and then had to find alternatives to try and grow and continue growing. Then I went through a divorce and I ended up selling all my businesses. And now I'm back in it. I'm looking for opportunities, and I've teamed up with Novastone Capital. We're a family office out of Zurich, Switzerland, and they supporting me on my search. And I'm looking for a business in those areas that I have expertise. That's health and wellness products, personal care and beauty products, food and beverage, specialty chemicals. And I'm also looking opportunistically at as sorry, alternative energy and green energy or renewable energy plays either directly or indirectly.
So how did you find the backer? How did you find your financial backer? Did you already know them? Was a relationship there? Did you reach out? Like, how did you discover the private equity group or family
Well,
office?
yeah, the truth is I've never really had capital or any backing. I've done it all, bootstrapped in my own means. Of course, maybe a line of credit from a bank, but that's about all. And so actually connected by chance, somehow I ended up on their website, saw it a few times. I think they were connecting me, got a couple of emails, and eventually I said, oh, let me try, let me see what happens. And did the application. It was grueling. It took about 6 months. It was like a mini MBA, I believe. We've been told about 800 applicants in total, and they whittled that down over 6 months, and we came through with five of us in my cohort, and then I was one of the first to apply, start. And then some other people like Carlos, I think you've interviewed him actually from my cohort. So yeah, that's how I got involved in that. And I knew, to be honest, I knew very little about search funds and or the whole program, and I've learned so much since I've started.
It's interesting. I've interviewed a lot of people about search funds, and I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned is they actually have a timeline. There is a mini MBA. Like a lot of times they're pulling people straight out of MBA courses, but they have their own education. There's a certain level of skills and preparedness they want that individual to have to prepare them to be the CEO of a company.
Yeah,
So a lot of people think they're going to go get a funded search and buy a business in 6 months. And I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't tell the search funders that because they have a criteria in their head. They have a process in their head to groom you to be that investor, to be that CEO operator. I've talked to, dozens by this point, people who have done the search fund route. I've even talked to some people that started that search fund, the whole process. Dave Dotson, his episode will come out any day now. By the time this one's out, it's probably going to be out. But, he's the Stanford professor that teaches ETA and search funds. He created the 2nd or 3rd search fund ever. The first one came out of Harvard. I don't know if you know
right,
that.
right.
Yeah, and he actually went and met with them. They decided to create their own, and it was either the 2nd or 3rd search fund ever. But, one of the lessons I did learn is that whole you said it was a mini MBA. There is
Correct.
a training there's a vetting process and a training process where they know they're placing bets on you, like, they'll fund your search, but they're also wanna be first in line to contribute funds to the actual acquisition most of the time.
Correct. Correct. So they're investing a lot of money. And I'm not a traditional cert. The traditional cert are much younger, maybe 5 years of experience, new MBA,
Mhm.
younger. And there's reasoning behind that. The Stanford studies, they've done, whole analysis for that. Our program's a little older. We typically have 20, 25 years of experience, and most of us in late 40s and older. So a little bit of a different model, but I
Mhm.
think value in both. Obviously, I'm biased, but I don't think the old dog should be kicked out just yet. And I think we bring a lot of value. But I think the vetting process that you were talking about, I think what's important, and I've spoken to a lot of aspiring search funders and some, young guys that have actually launched the search fund successfully. And actually they've actually given me feedback. And one of the things that's sort of common in the denominator was it was easier for them to raise the money than it was for them to find the business. And that's interesting because for me, it was always the other way around, right? I always struggled with capital, but I think because they come out of these universities that have such a strong community around the search fund community, those universities have massive amounts of capital and a lot of skill and support for those search funders. So I think it's a fantastic program. And the more you learn about it, the more you get into it, the more, the more you fall in love with it for sure.
I think up until about, and maybe I'm wrong here, somebody listening to this can send me an email and tell me I'm totally wrong, that's okay. I think until probably 10, maybe 15 years ago, it was nearly exclusively Ivy League. My master's degree, my MBA was in 2007, I think. I don't recall, like, ever hearing about ETA. And I have an MBA in marketing. I never heard about, like, we didn't discuss acquiring companies and all that stuff. If there was a course on that, I probably would have taken it. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I did marketing because it was the thing was that at my time at that time was my weakest point. And I thought, well, I got to do something to support my entrepreneurial side. So it's either accounting or marketing, and there's better looking women in the marketing program. So I went that way. So I was single at the time, right?
Yeah, no, I've got some interns that I work with and I've been through a few interns and I encourage them. I said, look, find out if there's anything at your university. If there isn't, start a group, start a discussion, maybe talk to some of the business professors, try and get them involved. And absolutely, if the university doesn't have it, I encourage all those young students now while they're at school, at college, start the process now. You don't have to wait till you graduate. You can actually start developing the connections and the infrastructure and the learning experience that you need in order to be successful. Because I think what is different is a good searcher is not only a good manager and operator, but he's also a good entrepreneur. He has an entrepreneurial spirit to get that outsized return that that investors are looking
It's a lot safer for the investor too. You're buying something that's already up, running. They're gonna help vet the investors will help you vet it. They're not gonna
for.
back or help you invest in something they don't believe in too. In the world of founders, you've done it 5, 6 times now, right? In the world of founding a business, you've gotta find an idea, act upon the idea, put it and create a product or a service, put it in front of the market, get product market fit, get some traction, all that stuff, right? So it's yours to create. In this business acquisition world, that's all already up and done, and you're buying something, and what I like to joke and say, the difference between buying a company and funding one is or building one is if you build it, you gotta figure it all out, it's yours to create, and if you buy it, it's yours to mess up.
But I've done both. I've founded businesses and it's a massive undertaking. It's an enormous amount of energy required to get that initial $1 million in sales, even $100,000 in sales. It's really quite because you've got to create it and you've got to market it and you've got to really get traction but once you buy it, and I've bought a few businesses, and one of the mistakes I will say is just be careful not to make too many changes too quickly. We come in with a little bit of arrogance, and maybe that's where the older good dogs have a bit of experience. Sometimes you make small changes that you think, oh, yeah, this is much better, but not necessarily for the consumer or the customer, right? Or the employees or even the suppliers. So you've got to be very careful. And I think I bought a business in Florida, one of my first business in the US, and we had an agreement. I was pulled out of the deal that I wanted to, but anyway, I went ahead with it, got brand new in the US. And they trained me for whatever it was, 3 months, and everything was great. And then she walked out of the door, and I realized as she walked out, I was like, "There goes half my business," right? And the reason was that she had the relationship with some of those customers, the key customers for years, and that relationship hadn't transferred yet. And so it's very important. It's subtle things like that that are so important to transfer. And so I think I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I go back to Warren Buffett as an example. When Warren Buffett buys a business, he tells the existing staff and management, carry on doing what you've been doing for the past 10 years, for the next 10 years, and I'll see you later. So there's validity and there's a good reason to continue doing what was being done because it
Right.
obviously was proving and making money. And it's one thing to improve on it, but one has to be very careful not to destroy it. It's quite easily done.
I'm a huge fan of the 3 questions, and sometimes 4 I told you before the podcast,
Yeah,
and we'll ask
well
some
done.
of those about some of the projects you've worked on, but I think the same thing goes when you acquire a company. I haven't bought anything this big yet, so, my goal is buy something eventually that has 30, 40 employees, sit down with them and run through the same questions. What are we doing really well? Like, just have them dump everything they think that the company's doing really well. It's like, "Cool, what can we do better?" So my 4 questions are always, "What are we doing really well? What can we do better? And what are we totally missing? What does our customer need that we just don't do?" And then the 4th one is occasionally you need to ask, "What are we totally doing that's a waste of time and money?" Right? What are we doing right now that just isn't working? We just That's pretty much the agenda of almost every call and meeting.
Sometimes what you're doing well is not always self-evident. Sometimes it might be customer service. It might be the way you approach it. It might be just that, service that you give that you don't realize. So it's very, it's an absolutely amazing question. I love the full question.
And then I plan on, like, even with this podcast and with the newsletters I run and everything like that, we're gearing up right now to do that with some of the listeners, get 8 or 10 of them on the call, like a Zoom call, and that's the agenda. What are we doing well?
Right.
What can we do better? What are we totally missing? What do you guys need to move your game forward,
All right.
right, that we're not talking about and we're not giving you that information because 'cause we're here to serve. So, I think if you did that when you acquire a company too, is go to the customers and go, "What are we doing really well?"
Absolutely.
You know?
Customers will tell you what they need, right?
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? It would be nice if I, instead of having two of the companies, you did both these services or both these
Yeah.
products, then I wouldn't have to have two suppliers. And some simple things like that. You
Yeah.
can, you know,
Absolutely, when you say, "What are we missing?" a lot of times I'll tell you, like, "Hey, I'm using 3 suppliers to build my product." Well, you make gear number 1, but you don't make anything bigger than X, Y, and Z. I need one that's almost twice that size. I get it from this other company. If you guys made that at the quality you make the other one, we'd go with you in a heartbeat, right?
right.
You're missing business by not asking your customers. And then, that's the what are we totally missing? That's the 3rd question in that series is like, what can we improve upon? Like, you don't answer our calls or whatever it is, like customer service or whatever. That 4th one is, for my employees, a lot of times it's like, what are we just totally missing? Right? I mean, what are we doing that's wasting money and time? So let's go to I think one of the things you did in your first business, you're talking about the granite. You had a problem. The granite had imperfections that wouldn't, basically made it not resellable. You sent engineers there. I didn't even think of that, that a lot of times, even though you might have a rock quarry, your slabs might be maybe it's granite, like you said, but the slab's not of quality to have consistent piece that would work in construction. Maybe it's better to I don't know what else you use granite for. Uh,
Well, they had a very cutting edge technology of essentially cutting the granite out of the ground
mhm,
with using dynamite, and it was an older tech, and it wasn't great. And so they were hoping to be able to find a deposit out of the whole deposit that didn't have the imperfection, and essentially cut that out and then and mine that aspect of it.
yeah.
But like it proved they couldn't do it. It was just too technically challenging. But yeah,
So then you didn't have a pivot at that point. So you said you ended up having to shut that one down?
yeah. I mean, I was what, 23, 24 years old. And yeah, so I started again. And so what I did is actually started 5 opportunities. And I
Mhm.
figured, well, one of them, I'll see which one gets traction. And so I did 5 different things sort of simultaneously. And the one that took traction is the one I put which eventually put more energy into and ran with that. But that's my strategy. And I do it even today. I look at 5 opportunity. I mean, even joining Novastone was one opportunity of others, and that one gained traction, and that's where I ran. So, sometimes that's how I run.
So when you said you bought a company in the United States, is that how you got your product to the United States? It's one of the easiest ways to get into another market or another country is you buy a company there, and then you got a channel to put your product through. Is that how you brought your organic products to the United States, or did you already have them here?
No, that's exactly right. I bought it as a channel. I initially started with a joint venture distributing, but the truth is, I didn't know the US market. I didn't know the market. I mean, it was completely different.
Mhm.
I didn't live here at the time. So I bought it and then moved here. I met a girl, and so that helped. And, but it was my school fees. And so buying a business, if you hadn't have the experience in the industry, and that's what I find that fascinating about the search model, to be honest, because I think it's fascinating to get involved in the industry you don't know and then having to learn the industry, because there's definitely school fees that have to be paid, and hopefully you can do it and not, bankrupt the investors, right? So I think that's probably one also a quality of a good searcher is to be able to learn quickly and from mistakes and adjust and move forward. But so, yeah. And so the mistake I made, well, a couple of mistakes. So one is I underestimated the relationship situation, but it taught me the industry. And then from that, I was able to form that company, which was essentially a retail company, into a manufacturing company. And so that was a massive transformation, and I was able to do that. But, that wasn't ideal. It wouldn't have been a good search model for sure.
So at this stage, how did you overcome her walking away with all those relationships? Did you call her back in and tell her to introduce you to everybody, or how did you overcome that?
Well, I just went forward and worked with what I had and made an effort to connect and build relationships, as fast as I could. In hindsight, if I had to do it, look, she wasn't coming back. She was done. If I had stipulated that prior, yes, that would have
Yeah.
been. And that's why going forward in my search, I am looking to keep the founder on board. I think the founder has and knows the business better than anybody. They created it, or even if they're not the original founder, but they have been running it for 10 years or 15 or 20 years. They're going to know the business, and it takes time to transfer that. And it's relationships with customers, suppliers, and employees, of course. But it's also knowledge and a deep understanding of the industry if you're not an industry expert yourself. So I think that's very, very important, is to keep that on board, keep those founders somehow involved, all those sellers, and just, have an access point, even if it's a sounding board. I think one of the lessons, one of my big takeaways of things I haven't done well in the past is I didn't have everything. I was an individual. I was self-created, self-funded. And I had my staff around me and my employees around me, my team around me, but I didn't have experienced entrepreneurs to be able to give me feedback and say, hey, no, maybe do it this way, that way, that way. And so I think keeping that founder on board, even as a sounding board, is say, hey, I'd like to do this. And he's like, no, that's a stupid idea. And he'll give you reasons why. It might sound critical, but if you can't overcome the founder skepticism, and they at least will fine tune you to know, okay, these are the issues, these are the problems, then you overcome those to move forward in our strategy.
It's interesting. One of the businesses you had kind of piqued my interest. I grew up a painter's son, so
Oh, right.
I've probably used more spackling than most people on the planet, right? From the time I was about I worked for him, my father. Him and I, we worked together. Oh, I was probably old enough to crawl up a ladder, probably 12 or 13. But, the spackling business, you said you created that? Was it like you took gypsum or whatever they call that and made the paste itself? Or what did you actually formulated one or you bought something and resold it?
No, I formulated it, and I formulated a lot of products, but the interesting, I've left a little bit out of the story because, of course, of time. But interesting, you tell me that about your father. So my dad was in the industry, and he had a retail shop,
Mhm.
and I said, hey, I've had this idea. I actually got the idea in Europe. Ironically, I was running around Europe,
Yeah.
and hey, I want to do this and this and this, and he's like, yeah, okay. It was very dubious, and so he kind of help finance the initial 50,000 or whatever to get off the ground. And we actually had two separate companies. He did mostly paints, and I did all the sundry products, waterproofing compounds. We did epoxies. We even did lubricants. We even did artistic paints at some point. We did a wide range, about 100 different products. And I would supply him, and we kind of were, not to my, but we kind of were competing with each other, to be honest. But he was in a different market. When I was big enough and I was manufacturing, we had massive machines and everything. And he actually went and got into trouble, and I actually came and bought him out and merged him with me. So we eventually ended up merging together, working together. And he did his side of the business. I had to leave him alone. I couldn't tell him what to do. Yeah, I can give him guidance, but basically, I ran the other side. But together, of course, we were strong.
So you grew up around a painting store, and my father not one I told you half the story. He was a painter, remodeler. I did that. That was his side gig.
What?
But so he actually worked for a company called Anchor Paint, and we manufactured paint there.
Oh,
So for
wow.
44 or 46 years, he worked at a paint manufacturing company and I would work there on the like, when by the time I was old enough to be there, right? I worked there in the summers, and then from the time I graduated high school until I joined the military, I'd work there during the winter for sure. Most of the time, even during the summer, I'd put in hours over there.
And talking about solvent-based products, so one of the things was, and I've done it in my organic business, was to find new products and new technology that are cleaner and greener. and better and healthier. And so we developed a lot of, at the time, water-based. A lot of the technology came out of the US, but we developed and worked with, and we were one of the first to market with some water-based enamels and water-based epoxies and things like that. To get away from that solvent-based product. So interesting, very.
Yeah. Yeah, when I left there, they were starting to have to do that a lot. They still had an oil-based side, but they were
Right,
starting to have to make a lot of water-based stuff
right, right.
and water-based enamels and that type of stuff. I've often thought about reaching out because now they're on the 3rd or 4th generation. I often thought about reaching out to them and saying, "Hey, would you like to sell your company?" Because I think it'd be cool to buy the company my father worked at for close
Right,
to a year.
right. There we
But,
go.
then the other side of me says, "Yeah, that place has been there for 52 years now or something like it was, like, only open for a few years before my maybe 60 something years now because my dad's been gone for 15. But, it was only open a few years before he went to work there. He worked there the whole time that place was open. It's been on the same site and same facility before EPA standards came in place. Let's talk about, what you're looking for now. Like, you've had a really cool wide variety, everything from granite to we both had that chemical paint thing to you moved from something that's probably pretty harsh, chemical and pigments and paint to organic, and now you find yourself out there, you're looking for your next acquisition. Let's talk about the search criteria. You mentioned it earlier, but revamp that real quick, and then we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into it.
So basically looking for a business, 2 million EBITDA to about 6 million EBITDA, enterprise value of about 15 to 50 million. And so part of my thesis, investment thesis is onshoring and nearshoring. I believe with new technologies, both with AI and robotics, that more and more technology can be applied to our manufacturing facilities here in the US and become competitive. I think also COVID showed I looked at some businesses during COVID, their competition, which was coming, most of the stuff was coming out of the Far East. Container rates went from $2,000 a container to $22,000 a container. And lead times went from 3 months to 6 months, if you could even get it. And then the other business I looked at, they had nearshoring, which wasn't in the US, but very close, 3 hour flight next day. So,
Yeah.
they place the order today, they get it tomorrow, essentially. So my whole focus is nearshoring and onshoring and essentially manufacturing. And I'm quite open. I have my sort of niche, but I'm really looking for a business I can just look at and get very passionate about. And I have a wide background in it, in experience in manufacturing. So it might not be that I know it exactly, but I think I'll have sufficient background in order to learn and grow.
So there's where we verge. You want manufacturing and you want products. I don't believe in that I want to mess with what I call SIB, but businesses, right? I'll be nice and call it stuff. So stuff in a box. So any business where I have to make stuff, put stuff in a box, put the box of stuff on the shelf, ship the box somewhere, maybe even to a warehouse, and then ship it to the end party. That whole logistics of storage, inventory, all that just doesn't appeal to me. Mainly because I watched what happened during COVID and and I've had a small business in that realm where you get the product shipped back to you. It's constant logistics. There is a play inside of it. I get it. There's people in the world that want to do it. That's awesome. It's not my thing. There's where we verge, right? We both had paint related careers. We're both entrepreneurs. You want to be in the manufacturing space and create stuff that goes in boxes and gets shipped out. I don't want anything to do with anything that has to be put in a box.
Well, I don't necessarily, I mean, it'll be in a box, quite right, but it doesn't have to be consumer facing. Ideally, I'm looking business to business. So
Okay.
raw materials, uh, so anything business to business is my primary focus.
So I know some people that have done things like there's a company in Tulsa that it's gone now. I don't know what they're up to now, but they tried recycling. So it was called upcycled plastics, and they would regrind and wash certain plastic and then sell it. And the problem with that, theirs was anyway, is the market was kind of up and down. So the price of the regrind eventually got to a point where it wasn't worth them the time, the energy, and the labor it took to
Right.
get it to a sellable product. They couldn't produce it and still cut a profits for what I understand. But, there's gotta be, like, a lot of stuff that meets the criteria of being a manufacturer and being in that green space, right? They're
Correct. Or with an opportunity to get into it, right? So maybe
yeah,
maybe it's not in there right now, but there's a trend in that direction, new products, new techniques. Talking about painting, we both have painting backgrounds. I was reading about a company that essentially has a robot to paint buildings, right? And so then, because labor is very, very, very hard to come by nowadays in the US. So there's always a mechanization somewhere. And I like manufacturing, but I also like distribution of products. I just like a repeat. steady business. But that's my background as well. So I tend to
Right.
follow that. Services is a very interesting business. A lot of people do very well in it, and maybe there's a combination of it. But I'm not. I must be honest. I'm not an expert in service.
There's something in that recycling space. I helped do a little bit of web work for them, and I had some other people, friends of mine that did okay in the recycling space. I was really interested in it for a while. I had a friend that did electronics recycling, basically, took computers and all that from all the companies, tore them down their basic components, and then sold it to be, like, metal extracted from it. And then some of the stuff just had to be, basically waste as little as possible, sell as much as you can from scrap metal. And then the plastic recycling company, the one thing that kept coming across the table, and we got offered tons, like literally, we'll give you as many truckloads of it as you want, was rubber tires because nobody knew what anything they could do with recycling rubber tires.
I actually know somebody out of California that has a patent on something using recycling tires and using it in. I won't even say it because I don't want to reveal it. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I have actually looked at some businesses that manufacture machinery that is used to recycle equipment and
Yeah.
plastic and things like that. It's an interesting business. It still seems to be in its infancy, but I think there's a lot of growth potential going forward. Yeah.
So there's 2 different styles of businesses though. You wanna be in a business that's generating revenue, profits, and sustains itself now. And there's businesses out that are trying to change the future, and, I think Elon Musk did really good with Tesla, like, the whole point of Tesla, he's never really concerned if you listen to him, you don't if I was one of his shareholders, I'd be scared snotless. I don't own Tesla stock because if you listen to him talk, he's like, the point of Tesla isn't to make the most money possible. The point of Tesla is to further the use of electric and electrical cars and electrical things that, a lot of the technology, they don't patent any of their technologies, they give them away, right? So any of they've got motors in that thing that are only designed by Tesla. They don't patent stuff. They, there's solar roofs in their solar battery pack came from technology engineers. They learned stuff by building the cars and better ways to store energy. None of that stuff patent. All the other car makers and stuff can just look right at their stuff, their designs. They basically open sourced all of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting model for sure. Yeah, visionary. I think there's two types. I guess coming back to searches, and I'm no expert on all searches. You probably had more insight on this than myself. But even managers generally, I think there's some managers that are just good operators, and there's some managers that are good operators and visionary. There's some managers that are bad operators and visionaries, but we'll ignore those for now. But I think if you want to operate the business, grow the business organically in its existing sphere. But as far as I'm concerned, when I want to buy a boring business and make it sexy. And by doing that, I want to apply technologies that might be cutting edge. So, you're doing well in what you're supposed to be doing. You're growing organically where you're supposed to be growing. And you're looking for opportunities, joint ventures and or new technologies, which you can apply to your industry to change the dynamic and become a market leader in your area. And I think if you're able to do that, and it's very difficult to do, but if you're able to do that, I think there's this huge opportunity. So it's almost like having a private equity play with a venture capital mindset as well. So it's sort of
Right. I could
fine.
get that. I could see doing something like there's a lot of industries out there that are very common. They're very toxic as far as the materials and products they have to produce. The one that's coming to my mind, like, was roofing. It's like the people who make asphalt shingles and that stuff. Horrible, horrible, like, thing, but in order to last 25, 30 years on the roof, they use chemicals and tar and other stuff on those shingles that eventually gets rinsed off, and that stuff gets into a lot of people don't realize that that stuff gets into the groundwater and everything else, right? Now, the trick is, could you buy a roofing company that does roofing and then, like, introduce a green product to it? Like, or at least, something less toxic or even an upcycled product like the tire, like the recycling tires in the roofing or something. That would be an interesting play to consider.
I think that's a good example. Take a mundane product and create. I mean, that's essentially what all these new technologies do, right? They take outside of tech, of course, in electronics and software, but in mundane products, I think the new technology that's going to start happening is we're going to recreate products that are mundane and make them better, safer, and greener. And I think there's huge opportunity in that. Whatever one does, do it in a greener way. And then look, all the corporations and all these huge companies and medium-sized businesses are really pushing that. that way. But I think smaller companies aren't doing it. So if you buy a smaller company, there's an opportunity to do it. It's much harder to rectify a big ship that's been a massive production. They could start with a smaller company and then grow that as a new opportunity on your product. So I do. I'm very passionate about being green. We're not green. I don't like to greenwash stuff, but practical, real, uh, changing, not something that's just top line. Oh, it sounds great, but something that has real value, either saves money, makes it more efficient. It has to make economic sense. If we can find solutions that make economic sense, they'll be implemented much, much faster and more effectively than if they don't.
And that's the real trick, right? It's one thing to say, "This solves this problem," but to find something that both solves a problem and makes a good business,
Right.
right? It's the whole recycling business. A lot of people don't get how dirty the recycling business is. A lot of times we all put our stuff in these tubs, and then when you see all
Right.
these exposés where they follow those tubs, and most of those tubs end up at the dump anyway. It's just because a lot of that stuff is inherently hard to recycle. It's not economically viable with the current technologies. So solving that problem would be amazing.
Well, another example, if I may, Ron, is, for example, buying a plastics company and then finding a green plastic that's biodegradable, right?
Yeah.
And moving in that direction, because that's my passion. It's microplastics and the environment are like big concern. They're getting in everywhere. I was reading some sort of papers on it where, microplastics are now so small and they break down. Plastic doesn't actually break down completely, but the UV breaks it down to these small, small pieces, getting into the fish, it's getting into our food supply, it's getting into our kidneys and livers and all that. So it's essentially a toxicity to the whole planet. And one way of doing it is getting away from plastic altogether, where we have a true biodegradable product. And so that's sort of one of my ideas. Buy a plastics company and they use new technologies where we start offering a green product and then slowly introduce that. But it has to be economically viable, it has to work very effectively, and it has to be price competitive. So, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome, but I think it is possible. I think what we touching on, these different technologies might sound all highfalutin, but I think that the point is, if you're running a business and there's opportunity, there's so many opportunities to find either new efficiencies, reducing labor costs, uh,
Mhm.
or just creating new products that have better for the environment. And I think small businesses possibly have an advantage. I don't know if they do. They used to before Google. You do a search now on Google and it's all just corporations. 10 to 15 years ago, you did a search and it was all these small companies. So I don't know how long the small advantage to small business will last, but for now, just just being more creative. And I think it's important to be a good operator, but I think it's also important to have a bit of vision and be creative and look for new opportunities as well.
Are there any, businesses in that realm you're just like where there's red flags, like, "I'm not interested in X," right? So, I know, like, for instance, I have a buying criteria for websites, blogs, newsletters, the stuff I'm looking for, but, I kinda have a criteria if it takes more than 5 people to run it, then it better be pretty big, right? Yeah, I'm looking for things that are very efficient. In that space, anything less than a 75% profit margin is running really poorly. Most of the time, these things run on really high profit margin. That said, occasionally you'll find somebody who has a six-figure blog and the thing's barely making any money because he's got 6 writers and he's just doing it all wrong. Is there anything inside of the space, inside of your search that says, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, but I won't buy like, I'm looking for blogs and newsletters and stuff, but I don't do anything that's risque. I don't do any adult stuff. I'm not interested in any, political stuff, anything that's very racially or spiritually biased one way or the other. I'm just not interested in any of that garbage. To me, it's an energy drain. It might be very profitable, but to me, I see it as like that's just going to suck energy out of my life. Are there things inside of your search criteria like I'm not interested in going down this path?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long list of not interests. I think there's a much shorter list of interests.
Okay.
I've looked at some cannabis companies, amazing companies, growing exponentially, very profitable, just not my area of expertise. I think you've got to be able to use the product to know that to sell the product, not to use it. So, in that type of thing. And I think generally speaking, if I just look at the business and if you have to have a good feel for it. And
Okay.
if it's something you feel you can be passionate about, that you see a vision for it and you really want to get involved in it, then I think then it's a good fit. But if it's something where you look at it and you're like, I don't really know the industry that well, I find fascinating in the search industry, in the traditional search industry, because in my area of expertise in Nodestone, we are very focused on our past experience and sort of all around that past experience. But in the traditional search, a lot of the searches are industry agnostic. And I've spoken to a few of them, and a lot of them end up in SaaS after 6 months of deciding what to do. So just a memo to you guys, maybe start in SaaS. No, just joking. Uh, but the point is that I think it's a little more difficult if you're industry agnostic completely, and you have to find an industry you have passion for. And I
Right.
think that's probably the first phase of the search in a traditional search is you've got to find an industry you're really excited about and then focus in that area. Do you believe you've got to have passion? And because passion leads to creativity, creativity leads to new opportunities. So, that's just my view.
It's very common in Oklahoma. All my real estate investor buddies like, "Hey, we should get in here, open this cannabis shop with you." I wasn't interested. And it's like, one, it's still not federally okay, so you
Right.
got a lot of, problems. And the secondly, because it's not federally okay, you gotta be careful going state to state. Most of the people, at least in Oklahoma, most of the people that were operating one were operating something like it before it was legal at all. So their mentality is that they still do things they probably shouldn't. I have friends right now that are in trouble because they partnered with somebody else that knew the space,
Right.
and the person new in the space was taking stuff in or out of the state, and now they're facing charges,
Right.
right? And because they're a partner in it or invested in it or funded it, they face the same charges as the guy that, like,
Wow.
was own it and broke the law, so they can go to jail. Not interested in that at all, but inside of that space, there's something I would be interested in seeing a lot more happen with, and that's hemp. Hemp paper, hemp concrete, there's a tremendous amount of use for that fiber. We used to many, many years ago, we used it really well. We made clothes out of it, rope out of it, and everything else, and then we fell out of favor in it. I think it's better than trees. I think we could make paper and other products out of it way better. So that might be a play that if you bought like a paper manufacturer or somebody that did cardboard manufacture, whatever, and then you switch the fiber over to something that's green and reproducible, that'd be fun to see happen.
That is very interesting. I did look, at was a feedstock for something in one of the projects I was working on, and I considered that as well. And I'm not an expert on it, but I believe it grows very quickly too. As you say, I mean, that could be a whole play, as a replacement for trees and foresting.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's the kind of natural and new thinking that I think is required, or I'd like to think anyway. I think I'm self-funded. Well, I'm not self-funded right now, but I was bootstrapped my entire life. So every single cent counted. I would, my mentality is ingrained in me is I have to spend this 10 cents. Am I going to get 15 cents in return? Right.
Yep.
And I might not get it now. I might get it 5 years down the line, but or we're going to get a 30 cents return, whatever it is. But you gotta make sure you're getting a return on your investment. So it's not pie in the sky thinking. These things can be done on the side as new developments, a new product and R&D. I think one of the things I did do well was developing new and unique products, and that put us on the map in my businesses. What were some of the areas I didn't do well? There's a long list of those. But so I think it's important to be open and be creative and drive it from the top because your R&D department, one thing, but your holes. I mean, that's essentially what Elon Musk does, right? I mean, that's what he does very well. He takes his businesses and he drives the vision of where he wants the future of them to go. He's not sitting in the lab actually doing a lot of this stuff, but he's involved in it to a point where he understands it and then he can drive it where he feels it's appropriate. And I think it's important to understand your business. I always find it fascinating when a CEO doesn't even know how to manufacture something, right? You see these shows, the hidden, the CEO undercover, and the CEO goes and he has to be on the line and does all this stuff. And he realizes, oh my gosh, this is actually a lot of work. And there's ways we could make this far more efficient. And
Mhm.
so I think you got to have a holistic approach to the business, understand all aspects of it, and be able to be creative as well. If you truly understand it, you're also creative.
You brought up an interesting point that I share with people when because people still pitch me for ideas and stuff like, "Hey, I got this idea. I want you to fund it." And tell them I don't, but I'll hear your idea and we'll play the brainstorming game. I'll help you with it.
Right.
The end of the story is most of the time I'll tell them most of their ideas are products or something they want to create. And I usually tell them, go find a company. You said this or kind of in passing in your statement there is go find a company that's already producing something similar. That would be a beneficial product to be in their product line,
Right.
but it's already up, it's already running, and preferably it's so profitable that it can fund your idea for your new product.
Correct.
Now you've got a bunch of different things, right? Now you've got a company with existing customers, product market fit, loyalty and rapport with those customers. You introduce something new, your idea, you're buying the company because you know it fits to that customer criteria, and you're gonna find out within weeks as opposed to you create a minimal viable product, basically the minimum thing you can get to a customer in front of them and see if they use it and get the feedback. You'll know right away whether or not it was a win or a loss, and then you can expand on it. The same thing you can do if you wanted to add green products and stuff is find a space in it that could use that improvement. Now you come up with your own little product ideas that say, I could improve it doing this. But meanwhile, it's generating revenue and it can afford to pay for your idea lab, your visionary side of it instead of the operator side, right?
I agree. I mean, use it as part of your R&D. You know, you should always
Yeah.
be doing R&D and new development. If it's a product or a service or a software, it doesn't matter. You're R&Ding all the time. And the best feedback to get is from customers. They're going to use it and tell you, no, this is terrible. This could be improved. And then you could improve the product. So yeah, I agree. But at the same time, be careful because you got to do it gently and you got to do it slowly because if you can't just replace, you got to do what the business is doing, do well, continue to do it and grow it and then
Right.
add to it. But don't just try to add to it and destroy that other business or neglect that other side.
Yeah, a lot of people, they jump into something and they buy something and go or, they get on the call with me and go, "Hey, I've got an LOI. When I get a hold of this business, I'm gonna do X, Y, Z," and then like, really?"
Right.
My
Yeah.
first thing is, "How fast are you gonna do all that?"
Right.
Right? And I like to play a game with them. I was like, "Cool, that guy that you just bought that business from and has been running it for" like, the one that comes to my mind, the guy's been running this business for 42 years. I
Wow.
said so the guy's been it was his first business he ever started. He had a home run the first shot, and he's been running his whole life, right? He's in his 70s, maybe close to 80 now, and he's thinking about selling it. 42 years he's been running this business, and you're gonna go in and make all these changes on day 1. What makes you think right out of college more than somebody that's been in that industry, knows that industry, and been running this and making $2 to $3 million a year profit every year for the last 30 something of the 40 something years?
Probably tried in those 40 years. He's probably tried half the things you're already going to try now. So he probably could give you feedback and tell you why it didn't work at the time. And sometimes ideas don't work because of timing. You know, maybe it was too early and you got to try it later, or you got
Yep.
to improve it, or you got to tweak it. But yeah, I agree. And that coming back, that's why you've got to keep that founder on board. Use them as a sounding board. Use that experience because even as a seasoned entrepreneur such as myself, I think the biggest step anybody can do as a CEO or as a searcher or as running a new business is being arrogant that you think you know better than everybody else. You've got to be very careful.
So let's talk about we're gonna run out of time here, but let's just talk about one more thing before we wrap this up is what are you doing now for your search? How are you sourcing deals? What does your process look like so that other search funders can kind of get some ideas from you on how they go out and find things?
Well, I'm finding a fair amount of traction in proprietary outreach. A lot of the deals are too small, although you know a lot of the responses are too small. But I still think they're very valuable. I will say I've learned so much in the last 6 months. I've just enormous amount of information and knowledge. Speaking to other entrepreneurs, I've spoken to some. He grew his business over 10, 15 years to a 20 million a year business. And then he had a CFO, fractional CFO, wasn't keeping his eye on the ball. And now he's in, chapter 11, trying to work his way out of that. I've had others that have done very, very well just pre-COVID. The sales were doing this, but they were in the airline industry was the bulk of their customers. And COVID-19 hit and everything fell apart. So it's just been fantastic to hear the stories of different people, learn from those stories, learn and connect. And so I would say, proprietary outreach. And even if they're not, I speak to everybody as far as proprietary outreach, because even if it's not right from the beginning, I see it's not a good fit for me. I still talk to them because first of all, it's connection. First of all, and secondly, I learn something. And thirdly, maybe if I'm in that space later on down the line, maybe there's a joint venture opportunity or a bolt-on opportunity later on. So be open-minded. And I use, of course, broker networks, but I'm reaching out to a lot of other searches that maybe for example, gave a deal to a colleague of mine in Austin, and they're under LOI, and he's busy going through due diligence and probably close. You transfer some businesses to others that isn't your experience, not your profile. They'll do better with it because of their experience. and vice versa. They'll give you stuff that's not in their wheelhouse and is in your wheelhouse. So, that's a lot of the deals that are being sourced just through colleagues and contacts and business brokers to an extent and outreach.
Awesome, awesome. I get that. You say proprietary outreach, you do cold outreach and that type of stuff, something you guys built in-house with the project you're on, or
There's something built in house, but I mean, it's not that difficult. It's just a matter of having a genuine message. I think that's important. I think if you come at, look, getting something to sell in your business is not about money, right? Because in many cases, search funds don't offer more money, especially if you're in the higher end and you're in a 20, 30, $40 million space. Founders don't necessarily want to sell to the highest bid. I sold the business I had 100 employees on. I sold that business to a strategic. And within a year, that alienated my brand, that alienated my employees, and that alienated my customers. I didn't even know what the hell they were doing, but there was arrogance. And so you've got to build the confidence of the seller, right? So it's not just building the confidence of the investors, but you've also got to build the confidence of the seller. And I think be real, and in your outreach, be real, be yourself, and offer something that others aren't offering, and that's essentially PE firms aren't offering, and that's a connection.
how do people reach out to you? What's the best way for somebody if they heard something that they know there's a business out there you might wanna see, or they wanna connect with you and help you in your search, or for whatever reason, if somebody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way you want them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, other searchers, anybody who has a business, brokers, investors, you name it. Probably LinkedIn. My LinkedIn page, probably the fastest and most efficient. Just because I get so much email, I might miss it, but it's on LinkedIn. I'll get around to it.
And your LinkedIn is linkedin.com/n/max, M-A-X dash business,
Correct.
and, I'll, put that in the show notes so people that can see that.
Thank you very much, Ron. Great conversation. As always, very interesting, and appreciate your time.
Well, hang out for a few minutes after the show. We'll call that a show, and, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron.
I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.